You may be seated. Shabbat Shalom. Just out of curiosity, maybe by a show of hands, how many people grew up going to summer camp? Wow. Okay. Any Camp Ramah alumni, just out of curiosity? We have a couple. All right. A few. So, there we go. Chazan Propus. Can you give us the full Camp Ramah songbook right now, please? Would you mind? I think you just proved my point. So, I didn't grow up going to summer camp. I grew up in Troy. We don't go to summer camp in Troy. It's dirty there. And despite my parents' best intentions to try to get me to go to camp, I didn't. So I want to thank the congregation. I had the opportunity to go up and spend a week at Camp Ramah this past week. As many of you know, my wife Rebecca works for Camp Ramah. So she has, her words, the privilege of going up and spending a month at Camp Ramah. She takes our two boys, Caleb and Eyal, who are 8 and 5, and they go up and they spend a month at Camp Ramah. So I got to go up for a week, taught a lot of classes, but also got to see them, which was very nice. So thank you for allowing me to do that. You know you are near camp when the signs, the yellow caution signs switch from deer crossing to caution, watch out for moose. I'm not even making that up. They're up there, Northern Ontario. One morning I looked out the window and I said to Rebecca, look at all those small birds. What are those small birds flying all around? She says, honey, those are mosquitoes. And I have lots of souvenirs to attest to that. So if you see me itching throughout, it's not some plague that's fallen upon us. It's a result of the mosquitoes. Camp is a fascinating world. I got to be there as well for Yom Sport, which is Camp Ramah's version of Color War. And those of you who grew up going to summer camp, you know what Color War means. I didn't grow up going to summer camp, so it's a strange phenomenon. And I said, honey, why are they shaving mohawks in their head? And here my wife says, shh, it's okay, this is what they do. It's what they do. They're painting their faces red and gray. It's okay, it's what they do. I can't wait till our children come home with mohawks and see if Rebecca will once again say, it's okay, it's what they do. Nevertheless, this is camp. And we know that camp is all about tradition. They have to say their prayers a certain way, and one of the best things about Machaneh Ramah, about Camp Ramah, is that every morning and evening the children they daven. That's what they do. The kids lead the prayers. The kids read the Torah. It's outstanding to watch. Shabbos, it's fully a Shabbos observant experience. So it's really Camp Ramah, a wonderful place, but they have to do everything the exact same way, right? Tradition is important at camp. As you heard, Chazan Propus was already able to burst into song. We know exactly how they do it. They eat a certain way, they sleep a certain way, they wake up, they do Yom Sport a certain way. They even sit in the same seats each and every week. Can you imagine that? People sitting in the same seats no matter what, each and every week. Tradition is an important part of camp. Now it's interesting to note that just as tradition is an important part of camp, how change takes place as well. When Rebecca, my wife, grew up going to Camp Ramah, it was not an egalitarian camp. She wasn't able to be called to the Torah. She wasn't able to lead the davening. It's now a fully egalitarian camp. And in fact, camp is so progressive. I went up not yesterday, but a week ago yesterday, and it was not long after the Supreme Court decision in the United States with regard to same-sex marriage. So I figured that would be a big topic of conversation, so I prepared, and I knew on that Shabbat afternoon, the very first thing I had to do was a limud sevet, a staff learning opportunity. And so sure enough, I prepared this whole conversation, the Jewish law of same-sex marriage, etc., etc. And I gave my little introduction, and even before we kicked off studying the text, one of the counselors raised their hand and said, Rabbi, I only have one question for you. Sure, what's your question? What took so long? It was interesting. They didn't ask, even though tradition is so important and Jewish law is so important at Camp Ramah, the question the staff asked was not why or how, But what took so long? It's always interesting to see how traditions take hold, traditions change. Social beliefs take hold, social beliefs change. We are now in the midst of Parashat Pinchas. And in all honesty, Pinchas is a very difficult portion for me. The end of last week's Torah portion, Parashat Balak, we find Pinchas, who is a priest and very zealous, right? He's very excited for God. And he sees a Midianite woman and an Israelite man sneak off into their tent by themselves. And we come to find out that he goes after them, Pinchas goes after them, and actually thrusts a spear through both of them at the same time. I'll let you figure that one out. And in this week's Torah portion, the parsha named after Pinchas, we find out what is his reward for doing this. He's rewarded with a breach shalom, with a covenant of peace. He's rewarded for killing the couple. He's rewarded for his zealotry. It's complicated, and I'm not sure that I entirely accept it, though there are lots of discussions as to why that happened. And at the end of our parasha this morning, Parashat Pinchas, we actually read about the transition of leadership, or the beginning of the transition of leadership, from Moshe to Yoshua, from Moses to Joshua. Now the Talmud asks an interesting question. Why didn't the transition of authority from Moses happen to Pinchas? Why wasn't Pinchas the one given leadership of the Jewish people? After all, we saw the zeal, the passion he has for God. Why wasn't he given the right to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land? And ultimately, what our rabbis come to tell us in the Talmud is that Joshua was such a student. Joshua was such a student. He revered every action his teacher, Moses, took. And he was such a wonderful student and such a revered, essentially child, though not biological, of Moses, that it only made sense that such a student should take over for his teacher. But that's a very rabbinic way of looking at a leadership transition, right? Of course, you have a teacher, you have a student. The student follows in the ways of the teacher, and thus it makes sense that the student takes over for the teacher. But I came across another commentary that actually suggested something different. And they asked the question, why did Joshua assume leadership instead of Pinchas? Why did this relatively quiet man, who was certainly righteous in his own way, but why did Joshua receive leadership instead of Pinchas? And ultimately the answer comes is that God realizes that evolutionary change is better than revolutionary change. Evolutionary change is better than revolutionary change. Pinchas could certainly have followed Joshua, but Pinchas was a kind of person who acted on instinct, who if he felt something, he did it. He didn't care what the consequences were or who was affected by it. If he felt in his heart like it was the right decision, he just went and did it. But Joshua was much more tempered. Joshua was much more thoughtful. Joshua was much more aware of the entire people, Israel, and contemplated what would be good for the larger group. Because after all, change is difficult. Change is complicated. We know how many people, or how few people as the case may be, switch from one summer camp to another once they've already started going to one place. We know how hard it is for people to sit in a different seat than they have in previous weeks. I know that I could ask the entire congregation right now to swap seats, even one or two to the left or to the right. Rabbi, nice idea. Not going to do it. Change is hard. And so as we think about our own people, especially the Jewish people, we realize how hard change is. And here in our Torah portion this week, Parashat Pinchas, we are being taught that evolutionary change is better. Because of that fact, evolutionary change is better than revolutionary change. And so now as we are in the midst of the new presidential campaign season, of course, kicking off for 2016, and we see the whole buffet line of candidates who are out to be president, we ask the question, which one of them is proclaiming evolutionary change? Which one of them is proclaiming revolutionary change? And what will be better for our country? When we look at our own congregation, we ask the question, what changes need to be made, whether they're organizational changes, structural changes, maybe even ritual changes a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, or in this case, a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. How do we make those changes? And I know that I must now officially be a conservative rabbi because in the last couple of weeks I've been accused both of being a Reform rabbi and an Orthodox rabbi. Must be doing something right. Change is hard. And so we learn that evolutionary change is better than revolutionary change. And when we look at the social phenomena that take place, whether it's same-sex marriage or something else, we note that the Supreme Court decision did not come out of the blue, but rather it was a long march to get to that point. When we look at civil rights, when we look at suffrage, and when we look at women's rights, we know none of those changes happened overnight. They all needed to be evolutionary change rather than revolutionary change. And so this parashah, Parashat Pinchas, let us reflect on how we as a congregation can truly enact change in this world, whether that be among our own congregation or whether that be how we truly bring tikkun, bring repair to this very broken world. Let us seek evolutionary change, not revolutionary change. And if you happen to be going to Camp Ramah, watch out for the moose and the little birds that like to fly around everywhere. Adonai ozi amo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God grant us the strength to be able to make change when change is necessary. And may God bless us all with peace. And let us say together, Amen.